Verity. I was speaking to Nicola Hutchinson, who is head of conservation at Plantlife earlier, and she described, she said, oh, you're doing the after dinner entertainment. And I thought, shit, if, I know Brexit Britain is a desperate place, but this really is desperate. Right, here we go. I'm going to give you, it's not going to be desperately long, it's going to be an introduction to Braunton. You're going to see lots about Braunton yesterday. I'm going to repeat a little bit that Rupert said earlier today as well, so you'll be completely Brauntonised after this experience. For those who don't know the area, you've got a map there and it puts the boroughs into perspective. So it's not the world's greatest maps, but you can see probably 9 there, the Braunton Burrows. There's the Saunton Sands Hotel at the top, which is always a useful place to locate ourselves from. You've got the Burrows coming south, bit of a golf course there, which I think is quite a famous old one. I can't remember much more about it. 2 other things really to mention. One is it has a very famous, I guess you'd call it an open field system, the Braunton Great Field. You can see it sort of dead centre there, which is one of the surviving open field systems on land that I guess is 1 to 2 metres. John, you can correct everything I say, but I'm imagining it's a few metres above sea level. And then to the south of it, you've also got this fabulous area called Braunton Marsh, which used to be salt marsh, but I think in about 1827 they stuck in some sea walls to sort of start making it into land. So if you go in there or look on Google Earth, you can still see the sort of tracery of ditches from the salt marsh days. A lot of it improved these days, and certainly the ditches sort of really deserve a good serving too. So a bit of freshwater marsh there. And then finally you can see this sort of dark green bit at the bottom, which is Horsey Island, which is Devon Wildlife Trust, Devon Wildlife Trust, and is a bit of managed retreat. A bit muddy, not desperately good for plants, but it's probably very good for birds. Just a few facts and figures, and then we'll get beyond the sort of the text, if you like. You can see the burrows. We know you've looked at it from the window here. What we need to say is about 1,000 acres of it is terrestrial sand dune habitat, including the golf course. That makes it, in SSSI terms, the second biggest sand dune system. Sorry, it is the second biggest sand dune system in England. And I think the SSSI element, or the terrestrial element, is basically 10% of all the sort of Natura 2000 notified sand dunes in Britain. A few more facts. It's had a long, long illustrious history of, it's a classic wildlife site. And you can see there some of the many designations. It was notified as an SSSI in 1952. I won't read them all out, but more intriguing perhaps is it's the heart of a UNESCO biosphere reserve. And of course it's a special area of conservation under EU law most recently. 17 of the 19 vegetation types recognised by the National Vegetation Classification occur here. 4 4 Annex 1 priority habitats from the EU days, those happy days as well. And one thing I'll mention is what I regard, what I call the Braunton florial, in other words, the Braunton assemblage of vascular plants. I should have said at the beginning that I work with Plantlife, I work alongside Plantlife, so what you're going to mainly hear about today is vascular plants rather than other things. And one of the things that I find useful for sort of understanding why a place is important is the sort of assemblage. The name, the rather pompous name florial, has been sort of made up, and that is the sort of special, the 33 plants that make this area very special. So we'll see a few pictures of a few of them as we go through the talk, but these are the sort of things that you might travel from afar to come and see. We'll start the history then back in 1662. This was John Ray, who was, I think, a Cambridge botanist, and he must have been an extraordinary person, because if you wind the clock back to 1662, I guess the British countryside had millions of meadows full of green-winged orchids and would have had vast heathlands that took days to get across, and yet he still managed in 1662 to find himself in Braunton Burrows, botanising, and he then went on to the lizards. So he picked out, I don't know, he must have had a sixth sense, but he picked out all the really good, or many of the really good botanical sites that we know today. And the thing that he recorded then, which is one of the classic Braunton specialities, is the great round-headed clubrush, which is that thing there. He finds it new to Britain in 1662. I quite like the idea that 200 years later, the good people of Ilfracombe, London and Yorkshire come specially here to see this thing. But it's, with the exception of a single plant that grows on the dunes at Barrow, the whole of the British population of a plant that's admittedly common on the continent occurs on Braunton, and we'll see that as we go on our walk tomorrow. Let's show you very briefly some of the key habitats. One of the exciting things at Braunton is that for about, sorry, I should have said size-wise, Braunton at a push is getting on for 6 kilometres long if you really stretch it out, and it's about 2 kilometres wide at its biggest. So it's a brute of a site. The coastline, well, the shoreline therefore is 6 kilometres long. And what's quite fun is that for about 2 kilometres of that coast, you're seeing really quite good accretion of sand. So in this picture on the left here, you can see these low dunes that have been forming over the last few decades. And because you're getting accretion of sand, and because it's such a bloody great long site, nobody particularly gets there, you're getting a very, very, very fine strandline flora developing on those 2 kilometres right down at the far end of the site. And this is the Devonshire Association. We're going to do the same walk tomorrow, but I hope there's nobody listening here, but their average age is about 110, and if they can make this work, you can. But we're going to walk across the dunes to the notches. This is very close to the notches, and you'll see there in summer last year, fabulous section 41 prickly saltwort right on the right there, and also lots of the frosted oric, if that's the way you pronounce it. Those are a few of the strandline specialities, not all with us, sadly. The frosted oric is the one on the right. I think about 10 years ago we lost the strandline beetle, which I know some of the sort of Welsh folk have around Gower and, just trying to think of Pembrokeshire and that sort of thing, I guess. And I was speaking to John earlier about it, so I could sort of gen up for the talk. And I think the theory is that actually, because there's so much movement of sand, we're getting sand deposited, but equally, you know, the sand can then be whisked away. This debris, it lives in the debris, it lives in all these bits of dead wood and what have you on the shoreline. And I think the theory from John, at least, and it seems perfectly logical, is that we're actually seeing this microhabitat being removed and replaced too much. So poor old little Nebrius complanator, or whatever it's called, is not with us at present. And very rare in Britain, I mean it became extinct in Britain for probably 30 years, is the sea knotgrass, which was a classic Braunton speciality. But with climate change, it suddenly has had an astonishing resurgence in Britain. So it was extinct, I think, from 1949-ish through to about 1972, rediscovered Atlantic Bay in Cornwall, and now it sort of crops up in Hastings, and it picks out all the places it used to grow. It doesn't really crop up in new places. It occurs, it has this extraordinary fidelity to places where it used to occur. And so it must be in the seed bank. It must just continually be sort of thrown around the landscape, thrown around that bit of the landscape, and it doesn't seem to move. So fingers crossed it might appear. You want to look at these figures here, because these will be relevant to later on in the talk. But you've got the 4 dunes there, the embryo dunes. I think they're sometimes called white dunes. You can see there the main 4 dunes, and then this new ridge of dunes just off to the left. A bit of sea bindweed there. Typical embryo, semi-mobile dune, I guess you'd call it. One of the great specialities for Braunton, one of the great specialities around the sand dunes around Swansea Bay as well, is the sea stock, Mathiola sinuata. So we'll see it tomorrow. It responds astonishingly well to management, but my God, the rabbits love it. So the big problem, yeah, I know rabbits are great, but one of the things that doesn't like rabbits is Mathiola, and they just love it. So we'll see a site tomorrow where we had 6 plants, then we did management. 6 months later we had 260 plants from seedlings that had come up from the seed bank, but then the rabbits had them. Sand lizards are present. They were introduced, I guess, I'm looking at John, in the last few decades.
2001, I think it was.
2001, and they occur over quite substantial parts of the 4 dunes, and we obviously had to look at this to make sure that where we were doing the notches we weren't losing sand lizards. Moving inland a bit more, we've got the biggest and most extensive of all the Braunton habitats, the sort of semi-fixed and fixed dunes, the yellow dunes, the grey dunes, and you can see there the figure of about 650 hectares, so it is by far the largest proportion of the site. For a long time ungrazed. Grazing came back onto Braunton in recent years, probably, I'm going to guess, 10 years or so ago. And I know Mike Howe, formerly of, I guess, CCW and possibly NRW, was a great, keen person. Mike you'll know as an entomologist, and he didn't like grazing on sand dunes because what he liked was the natural processes to create the bare sand, which gave you these dramatic sort of shows of time. And I was looking at this picture, this is from 1993, you can see time there in the foreground, you can see Viper's bugloss blue on the left, you can probably see rest harrow, you can see all these nice things, good food plant, good nectar plants and what have you. So Mike is a great one for ungrazed dunes that are naturally mobile, and therefore you get this early and mid-succession. And you can't blame him in some ways. The one thing I was supposed to show you was, you see how well the sea stock's doing at the back as well, the grey patches on the slightly higher dune ridge. There's a bit more of the habitat, the same good old species that I know shrill cardabees or whatever love so much. And just one quick speciality of course, probably many of our dunes is the dune pansy on Viola, Tricolor subspecies curtisii. I'm not a great lichen person, but I can recognise these two, and they're two specialities. I know John from Cornwall will say that his scrambled egg lichen on the left around gear sands, fabulous big colonies there, but an extremely rare section 41 priority lichen, which when it gets wet looks like glistening scrambled egg. And then on the right, I suppose I hadn't really thought about it, it's sort of a breakfast, a melee of, there's sausage lichen, which is getting rare as well. And just another species, we don't have a lot of kidney vetch on the dunes, so small blue has always been highly restricted on the dunes, and I think at present is thought not to be present. And we were hoping originally with Dunescapes that we'd do some management where the kidney vetch mainly occurs, but money hasn't really quite got us there. We move finally into dune slacks. You can see there that we have about 111 hectares of dune slacks on the burrows. You can see a lovely ring there. This is a pond that John made a few decades ago. Lovely, lovely ring there of bog pimpernel. And if you really are nerdy, and there's something nerdy on the dunes at present actually, they're spending days and days looking for this thing. That is about the size of your small fingernail. And that is Petalophilum ralphsii. Ralphs was a great Cornish botanist. And everyone gets very excited about this because it's listed under EU, I was trying to think which annex, Annex 2 I guess it is. And somebody, Matt Stribley, decided he'd count these. He got up to 21,860 or something. Makes the world go round. And if you look for that and you're looking at these very small, we can find this tomorrow, we can definitely show you the amber sandball snail, which, because it's one of those things, I'm a botanist and I like big showy flowers. It's one of those things where it lives on Braunton and it lives on one sort of calcareous flush in Cumbria. And the more facetious side of things, well, I bet it's all the way up the motorway, but apparently it's only in 2 British locations. I bet there's more though. And then of course the orchids, this is just a sort of melee of early marsh and probably southern marsh in there, and possibly the odd hybrid in amongst creeping willow. So that's your sort of tour of the habitats. let's just quickly look at how habitats are declining, or how habitats are changing, I should say. Didn't turn that on, so that's a waste of time. I'm going to get told off for this, but hey ho, got my gin and tonic, so I'll go for it. I used to know Ken Fig and Braunton Burrows and Braunton from the 1980s. So I used to botanise around here, and I was out there for a week with John Hope Simpson, who was this famous, one of those late 20th century botanists. And I don't think we were here, we certainly weren't in this hotel, but I can remember sharing a room with him. And all I can remember was him putting his dentures in as this student. But I knew Ken Fig and Markham well as well. And that was the 1980s, and this is where I confess that I was driving past, probably about 2012. And I thought, ooh, I'm a gardener, and I want to do some dacloriza breeding. So I thought I'd pop into Ken Fig, because I saw it down below the motorway. And I thought nobody would notice if I whipped a couple of the brick red form of marsh orchid. And I got to the education centre there and didn't walk very far because I couldn't really remember the site. And I can remember thinking, Christ, this place has changed. Succession has taken on the... I didn't, by the way, take any orchids because I never got that far. And in fact, if I'd gone further, the place is really very delicious. But around the education centre, you thought, God, these dunes have succeeded so much. And once plants sort of get into this sort of rut of succeeding, you just know that the end result is this really dull sort of woodland, secondary woodland with those dull 20 tree species that we have in Britain, and the sort of dull sort of assemblage of bramble and bracken and ivy and all that, and full soap grass. And that was what sort of made me think, crikey, I'm going to move from being a botanist, a plant thief, to being a plant conservationist of dunes. So for, I think, about 4 or 5 years, happy years, Plantlife, who I persuaded to work on dunes, got involved at Ken Fig. And I can remember we were there at the time when things like fen orchid did astonishingly well. So people will remember, I don't know whether they can actually work out who that is, but that's Dave Carrington, who used to be the warden at Ken Fig. And we'd gone from this marvellous stage where before dune work was undertaken, this sort of mechanical dune work was undertaken, they kept this population of fen orchid going by just simply mowing it. But I suppose what mowing does is to just sort of maintain, it's a maintenance means of managing sand dunes and managing rare plants. But what something like fen orchid also needs is a sort of colonisation phase. And the colonisation is provided when you give it a big area of damp sand with very, very little competition. The fen orchid comes in and off it goes. And it was lovely to think that in the 1990s, the population of fen orchid at probably in the early 2000s as well, averaged about 190 plants per year. There was a really bad year of 40 plants. And then, you know, I can remember towards the end of the 2010s, you were getting up to thousands upon, well, 4,000 plants of fen orchid at Ken Fig. So the way that that was done was simply by creating these bare platters. A bit like you in an allotment, you would go and weed it before you sowed your carrots. We were scraping off the top of the vegetation, exposing peats and sands, lovely stable substrate for sowing seed onto. The seeds got in there and off they went. We then started to look at Braunton. This is probably about 2013-14. This is a picture from 1958. And you can see there just what a magnificent, beautiful, beautiful place it is. When you look out of it there now, you don't really know it's a sand dune unless you look closely because you don't see sand. But this was 1958, looking very, and you know, you look at those lovely, lovely crescent, whatever they are, down in that wet slack in the front, and you think, yes, please. We've seen this from Rupert earlier. There's 1940, and then 62 years later. Rupert has obviously calculated there's 60% bare sand there, and remember he said that it wasn't caused by the army, it wasn't some unnatural land use that gave us that 60%, it wasn't sort of butchery by the army that did it, that is the way it was. And you can see what 62 years of colonisation have done on the right, and of course the next stage, which you see at the back of the dunes, is this sort of succession to that dull woodland. Don't like woodland. One answer, of course, and one of the early answers, I'm going to guess these were Soways, weren't they, John?
Yes, yeah.
And I guess these were on what was called Soway Plain, which is in the northern third of the dunes. sows do a good job, but what grazing I think doesn't do is to create these big platters of bare sand. So I think you need sand for colonisation by lots of the rarer plants and plenty of the animals. And grazing is more the maintenance that allows you to sort of maintain these populations. There's another picture. There we are in the hotel up on the top left. And you get an idea of presumably the same time. I think it was about 1958 as well. So a tiny bit of really rubbish science from Byfield. What you can do on the back of an envelope is take those 32 floreal species and you can just roughly ascribe them to the amount of bare sand that they want. And you can see here that on the left you've basically got a species there, that's the sea stock, which is a species of embryo dunes. You could say that the middle one there is probably, which is the knotted pearlwood, is perhaps a thing of those yellow semi-fixed dunes. You're starting to get into fixed dune turf with the famous red orchid, the Daclorhiza incarnata coccinea. Third one across, and then you get at the far end to dune helleborine, which is not a Braunton species, which is a thing you might associate with woodland or scrub or rather tall vegetation. If you then look at those 32 species, you start to see that you've got scrub right over on the right, you've got rank grass, low scrub. This is very noddy, by the way, but I think it starts to show you that all our rarer specialist sand dune plants are things that tend to like the sort of open to semi-open, embryo to semi-fixed conditions. So back in 2014, we decided at Braunton that Plantlife would set up a sort of experiment to see what would happen if the work that had been done by the various organisations at Kenfig was brought over to Braunton. And we're going to go to this place tomorrow. This is a place called Old Mare Slack, which is in the southern third of the site. And the decision was taken, with lots of bludgeoning, that we'd actually completely get rid of any sort of woody or tall woody vegetation from the place. And in those days, you didn't worry about those dratted bombs or anything, so you just stuck the digger in. Up it all came, give it a shake, and I don't know whether this is good or bad, but in places, I was asking Rupert the other day, but we can remember there were the sort of sycamore trees that were about, I don't know, 10 metres high, or thereabouts. So we sort of denuded the place. This is Old Met. You've got the dry dune at the back. You can see quite a bit of the tall woodland at the front. Probably half of you tomorrow will think, oh, it's much better as it was. But we cleared that out in its entirety. We left a couple of little bits. Behind the Land Rover, you can see a little bit of true sort of bulrush. And then there's another little bit over on this left, which was an area of rare rushes and that sort of thing. This is what it looked like. So we're 2014, this is a sort of experimental trial. This is looking the other way down. We looked up first, this is looking at the other way down. Very happy with ourselves after that destruction. So just to show you, this is roughly the same view. The little pond with the bulrush is what you'll see in the foreground next. And you can see this after a few years. And what you've started to get is a much more diverse sort of vegetation type. You've got a lot of those, whatever it was, 17 vegetation types back through management. You know all about this, I don't know why I'm saying it actually. And you're getting loads of things like knotted pearlwort and few-flowered spikerush and the little amber sambal snail, and now there's loads of autumn ladies' tresses that have seeded into this area. So it is working a treat, and you're getting some areas with permanently sort of ulcerating bare sand there, the other bits vegetating and very nice too. And you can see there three things that have benefited. These are all protected species in Britain. They're all Section 41 species, I think. But going through it, we've had a resurgence in terms of the famous clubrush, raised clubrush there, thousands of new plants. And I don't think there's been any true regeneration of this in any really meaningful way, probably for decades and decades. The middle one, again, we've seen the sea stock, and I mentioned the 6 to 260 plants before the rabbits did their dastardly worst. And then on the right, you've got another great speciality, which is the water germander, which is known in the Fens and at Braunton and pretty well nowhere else. Probably 2 native sites in Britain at present. Fluctuates badly. There were 36,000 plants. So in 1986, but I can't remember now. And it's gone down to a few thousand. But what was nice was we were finding new, or at least one new colony where the trees had been. And the dry dune, you know that Mike Howe beloved dry dune worked really well. And one of the specialities that somebody got very excited about, one of the things that did really well was the heath dogviolet, which happens to be the food plant of a moth called Pancalia schwarzella, which is the little moth there. Absolutely, when the violet did well, moth did well as well. So it's shown, I think, through this process that we could reverse the fortunes of really quite a large number of rare plants and animals. And so we sort of got into the dynamic dunescape where we are now, really. We had to decide. I was mainly involved in sort of developing the proposal itself. What we tried to do was to try and decide how much work we wanted to do and how much money we wanted from from EU and the National Lottery. And if you remember, right at the beginning, when we saw those different habitats, you saw that there were the 11 hectares of embryo dune, there were the 658 hectares of fixed and semi-fixed dune, and there were the 111 dune slack areas. And Natural England have very kindly said that in a good sand dune system, in a favourable condition, you get a certain percentage of bare sand. And so we really ended up sort of, you can see that in the second grey column, if you like. So for fixed dune and dune slack, it was 5 to 20% ought to be open, sandy habitat. And so you can really see we did the math, so 20% of 111 hectares is 22 hectares, and that's the sole reason we did 22 hectares of scraping of dune slacks. And so on and so forth. I think there are three theories that I think as conservationists we should guide us. One is the Lawton sort of principle. I just typed in Lawton, John Lawton, and this picture came up, and he's lying in plants, so I assume it's the right John Lawton, but I have no idea if it is. He, of course, came up with the bigger, better, more enjoyable. The worst time was when I got something off the internet. I went, I'm always worried about getting things off the internet, but I'm always going to assume, you know. And then Mary went, it's my photo! Because I thought that nobody would ever catch me out because I stole photos off the internet, but they do. John Lawton came up with bigger, better, more enjoined, and I think that is very, very key. And I think bigger, better, more enjoined doesn't just mean in terms of rewilding and big habitats on the landscape scale. I think that means it in terms of smaller structure as well. I also highly approve of the sort of Paul Dolman, hoping this is Paul Dolman, stolen off the web. He's from UEA, and he basically says that actually in the past we butchered our sites big time. They were therefore more structurally diverse, they had more microhabitats in them, and that's why plants do, and indeed animals do, better in the past, because we've tended to see habitats homogenise over the past few years, or past few decades. And you know, if you go onto a chalk grassland today, once you've seen one chalk grassland, you have seen them all. I do like chalk grassland, by the way. And this one I did like, and apologies to Ben in the audience there. I think we've got to remember as conservationists that we do things, we should do things that don't just preserve or conserve the greatest diversity of plants. People are obsessed by species richness. Often it matters, but what matters more, in a sense, is what makes a place special. I can remember somebody once saying, we've done a survey of Breckland, and even though 80% of Breckland is really nice, rare things of open habitat, they were really pleased that the number of species had gone up because they'd found wren in the plantations. And this was from a bit that the National Trust report the other day, and my heart sank when I saw the specklewoods and the red admirals and the voles and the badgers and all that stuff. Don't get as old as I am, I get very curmudgeonly. We did the management planning. We wanted to do this on a big scale. These were areas we drew up. This is the southern third of Braunton, so it's probably 200 acres you see on that map there. We drew up plans for those areas, and then we tried to get at least money for some of them. We then sort of did more targeted, if you like, management plans for particular slags, and you can see one of those there. I thought nobody bothered about UXOs, so I was roundly told off when I didn't cost into it the UXO surveys. We've heard about that this morning, but you can see the sort of problem that UXO caused, because we had to cut all the vegetation before we dug it up, so we couldn't do it in that gung-ho way that we had done it in the past. And just to give you an idea of scale, you see a little vehicle down in the right at the bottom of the picture. So this is tway-blade slack, and all the sort of slightly, looks like sort of a grouse moor, doesn't it? Gorgeous. All the sort of pale brown is areas that have been cleared of scrub in advance of digging up. You can see there, this is another slack, this is pebble slack, and you can sort of see the diggers working away down in the bottom left. There, down in the bottom right, is the top end of that old met slack that I showed you earlier, sort of gently evolving. And work in progress. I don't want to show you too much of this, otherwise you'll think, why the hell have we walked 6 kilometres tomorrow? But you get an idea of the scale of the work that has been done at Braunton. This is sort of part of a 6-hectare block that has been, to all intents and purposes, stripped of vegetation. The dump site is in that picture as well, and hats off to Rupert and the people who've done this, but the dump site is there, like a peppered moth that you can't see, but was sort of in this area here. Yeah, so that's it. You'll see more tomorrow. One of the strangest bits of biology is that whenever I've been out with Rupert, I suddenly realised he pointed when he wanted a photo. Because sand dunes are so dull, really, that you can't take a good photo of them without a person in them. So ever since we've ever taken a photo, we made sure that Rupert has pointed. And I've got thousands of them. But there are a few people there, only a tiny number of people there that I'm thanking, but it goes without saying that there's billions of others from MOD and the NE team and all the rest of it.